All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our first of 7 virtual capacity building workshops. Missouri Humanities' mission is to enrich lives and strengthen communities by connecting Missourians with the people, places, and ideas that shape our society. By providing these workshops, we hope to strengthen and impact nonprofit cultural institutions make in their communities throughout Missouri. Because today's workshop is set up as a webinar, please submit any questions into the chat. We will get to as many questions during and at the end of today's workshop. Today's workshop will be on documenting impact of your humanities programs presented by Cecily Hill. Cecily Hill is a director of narrative strategy at the National Humanities Alliance. She oversees research and the impact of federal funding for the humanities and devises strategies on communicating that impact. Previously, Cecily led the NEH for All and Community Case Studies initiatives, which focused on the impact of the humanities on public life in the United States. Prior to joining NHA, Cecily served as the Marketing Communications Director for Books at Work, a public humanities nonprofit based in Cleveland, Ohio. Her writing has appeared in studies in English literature, 1500 through 1900, and women's writing. She holds a BA and an MA from the University of Southern Mississippi and a PhD in English from Ohio State University. And so without further ado, here is Cecily.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much to Missouri Humanities for having me. I'm going to quickly share my screen so you can see the slideshow, the slideshow will be available after the session. Give me just a moment to get that sorted away. Okay, does that look okay? All right, so documenting the impact of humanities programs. Just as a little bit of background, as my bio indicated, I have a lot of experience documenting the impact of humanities programs with an eye to telling the story of the humanities at the federal level. And what that has looked like specifically over the past 8 years has been working directly with grantees of the National Endowment for the Humanities to document their impact primarily by developing surveys and then implementing the surveys to showcase the work that they're doing under those grant-funded programs. And then additionally, working with people throughout the United States to understand the impact of humanities work in their communities, often through interviews and focus groups. So I'm gonna focus on surveys today, but I'm gonna kind of touch on a lot of different ways to document the impact of humanities programs. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, a few notes about documenting impact. I have a few different sections and I'll just kind of pause in the middle in case somebody has a question. And if there aren't questions or if you kind of miss that pause, I'll wait until the end and come back around as well. So I recognize that people are probably coming to this session with a lot of different levels of experience. Please bear with me if I'm talking about things that you already know about. Hopefully there'll be some opportunities to learn something or think about things that you haven't thought about in the same depth before. But documenting the impact of humanities programs helps us in a variety of ways. It helps us record our successes and reflect on our areas for growth. We can use it to report on our work. I know that's a really important element of all documentation or much documentation. You can really use it to apply for funding. You can take the documentation that you do sometimes for other grant programs, sometimes you do it on your own to help strengthen your applications for grants. You can use documentation to promote future programs in marketing materials, for instance. And of course, documenting impact also helps us understand our audiences, understand the people who come to our programs, why they're there, and the impact that our programs have on them. Additionally, and I think I gave this its own slide because I think it's, we don't think about it enough, but it's so important. Many methods for documenting impact provide significant opportunities for our audiences to reflect on their humanities experiences. So in working with grantees and with like program officers and project managers, a lot of the time, one of the things I hear is concern over, burdening people with surveys, burdening people with asking them to kind of report back on programs. But I think it's important to remember that a lot of times people come to humanities programs. Sometimes those programs, maybe they're watching a documentary, maybe they're in a discussion group, but they're a little bit shy. there's might be many reasons that people don't speak up for one reason or another. And sometimes providing a survey that has really nice, thoughtful questions in it gives them that kind of opportunity to reflect on their experiences and to make meaning out of their experiences. And so in that way, surveying in particular, focus groups, interviews, those can all be actually be thought of as part of the humanities program. So not separate from it, not just an evaluation, but a way to think about it still can be something that is an offering to the people you are working with and for. I also, because I'm talking about surveys a lot in this session, I also do want to have a note on like what counts as data, because I don't want to leave this conversation with kind of giving the impression that the only thing that matters is surveys. I think surveys are important. I like them a lot, and I do a lot of work with them, but data comes from a wide range of sources, including focus groups, interviews. Those are kind of formalized ways of gathering data, but also informal ways of gathering data. The pictures you take at events, videos, emails. If it's an educational program, assignments can count as data, transcripts from the different kinds of conversations that you do, news articles. I'm probably forgetting many, but when you're thinking about how do I tell the story of my, all of these things matter and can contribute to the documentation of the work that you do. I'm going to move into why surveys, and then I'm going to kind of get into a little bit more granular information in just a moment. So I'll get through this slide and probably maybe the next one, and then pause for some questions if there are any. So I really like surveys because I think that they are relatively straightforward. I think people are used to being surveyed a lot. So you have most people who attend programs of any sort or who go to museums or libraries. They have, answer the phone. They have some experience with being surveyed. And so people have a fairly sophisticated, relative to many other things, a fairly sophisticated understanding of surveys. Surveys provide both quantitative and qualitative data, which I'm going to get into further on. But both of these are really helpful. And so you can get two things at the same time, and that matters a lot. For humanities organizations who often are working without an abundance of staff time, we're all often working with a little bit less in terms of resources than we could do with. Surveys they're still work, but they are definitely less labor than managing focus groups or interviews. So there are many places where you might want to use a focus group or interview. A survey is less labor intensive, and that can help out a lot. And focus groups and interviews are marvelous opportunities to reflect, but surveys also still offer that benefit to participants, such as the opportunity to reflect on their experiences through qualitative questions. All right, I'm going to pause in case there are any questions before moving on to the next set of my slides.
Oh, yeah, we didn't have any questions yet, but we did have a comment from April Walker. She said, let people know ahead of time that you would like them to complete a survey or tell their story about their participation. Also, if you pay them for it, they'll be more likely to do it.
Absolutely. I always recommend telling people that they're going to be surveyed, making the surveys really public, really obvious, and having payment for surveys does help, but it is definitely not the only way of getting people to take surveys. So I know that paying people to do a survey can actually be a really difficult thing for organizations that are on strict budgets. And I don't want people to think that that's the only way to do it. It does sometimes increase response rates. So we'll come back to that in a little while. So step one, when you're going to do a survey, you want to identify what you are going to survey and how. And the thing is about these steps is that some of them seem kind of intuitive, but I do think it is helpful to actually kind of force yourself to go through all of the motions. I mean, that's why I broke them out here. And it is genuinely what we do when we are surveying someone. We'll have all of these conversations. We'll, have conversations with the people we are working with to kind of break all of these things down. So thinking what you're going to survey, how you're going to survey it, mostly thinking about programs that are right for surveying. Not everything is easily surveyed, but things that can be surveyed are things like lectures, exhibitions, workshop, tours, discussion groups, archiving days, festivals, educational programs. We've surveyed all of these kinds of projects. There are also things that are sometimes harder to survey, but still worthwhile. So for instance, we worked really closely with the Native Northeast Research Center. And this is a project, it used to be called the Yale Indian Papers Project. It's an online documentary edition project. So this is digital publication. And that can be a really hard thing to survey. It's hard to kind of know exactly who is using a digital publication. It's hard to survey the people who are using it. But they did receive a grant for to work with different community groups to kind of improve their processes and to make the resources they were providing online better. And so we worked with them to do a survey of those groups. And for the purposes of their work, where they were really trying to serve those community groups, the survey helped them understand the degree to which they were doing it and the impact of that outreach. So even things like that, where maybe you don't have a audience in the kind of traditional sense, you can think about surveying, and they can still be quite productive. And then you just kind of want to have, as you kind of go into it, you want a general sense of how you plan to implement that survey, so you can do things like think about length later on a little bit more easily. So thinking about your delivery method, do you want to use a paper survey or a digital survey or both? How intense is the survey experience? Do you think you're going to have pre-surveys and post-surveys? You can sometimes, if you are doing a program that has kind of a lot of face time with people, maybe you're doing a series of workshops or a series of discussions and you have a lot of the same people coming to them. In those cases, it might be well worth your time to do a pre-survey so you get a sense of what people's baseline is. And then you can also do a post-survey with most humanities programs that I mentioned on the last slide, whether that's a very short digital survey or paper survey, you definitely have a post-survey option a great deal of the time. I can see that there are some comments in the chat, so I want to stop if there's, in case there is a question there.
So it looks like the one question that we did get was,
I do see the what. Can you go back to the what counts as data slide, please? And I am going to keep moving forward, but I will say that the survey this is going to be sent out, and so if that's useful to you later on, you will get the slides. And then
yes, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and then I can see do incentivize surveys skew the results at all? And I think that I don't think that there's a real consensus on the degree to which they skew it, but I do think that I think that for many cases with humanities programs, you don't really need an incentivized survey, and you might get different kinds of results. You might be more likely to get results from people who are more interested in just like completing the survey and getting their incentive, the gift card or whatever, and less interested in really reflecting. And I think that can make a real difference. We get really robust qualitative reflections in the surveys that we use. People write a lot and we don't make them. And we really value that writing. And so, I think it might change that dynamic in particular. And I would at least be aware, try to be aware of that. Okay, step 2, designing your survey. This is a really fun part. So in general, I always recommend that people begin with the end in mind. I think a lot of times surveying comes last and it comes hurriedly right before a program takes place. Somebody is often like, oh, maybe we should survey this program. People pull together some questions and then they, deliver that survey. But a survey that is aimed at really helping your program is one that you think of, as part of the entire program experience, and one that you kind of build out from the beginning with the end in mind. Like, what are you going to do with that survey data? And that helps you not waste your time, and it helps you not waste the time of people who participate in your programs. So thinking about who are you collecting data for and what are you going to do with it? So for instance, I think a lot about reporting to funders, or so data for reporting to funders. Sometimes funders have specific questions they want you to ask. You need to think about that. Maybe you're trying to learn about the impact of a specific program within a larger suite of programs or a specific intervention. And so maybe you're going to want to emphasize some questions about those things. Maybe you want to understand why people are coming to your programs or where they're coming from. And you want maybe to think about materials for marketing and fundraising. Maybe you're just trying to better appeal to local audiences, and so you want to get some information from them. But these can be formal things that you want to do with data. It could be informal. It's just helpful to think through what you really want to do with it, because and that might change, but having that in mind at the beginning will shape a stronger survey. From that, you want to go to brainstorming. And this is where this is, I think, one of the most fun and productive parts of the survey process, whether I'm doing it just with other staff at NHA or I'm doing it with people out working on programs. You want to think about what do you need to learn about your audience. And then this is the best part, I think. You want to think about what the goals of your program are and how do those goals connect to the impact of your work. So this requires that you kind of get really granular about what you actually want to do with the work that you are doing. So maybe you're hosting a veterans discussion group. This is a kind of project that we've surveyed a great deal. And the goals of the program, maybe it's a reading and discussion program. That's one I've worked with a lot. And the goals of the program are, to expose veterans to humanities resources, and maybe also to provide opportunities for connections between veterans and your community. And maybe there's another goal of helping veterans connect with local resources and institutions. So thinking in that way, not just about the kind of humanities goals of your program, but the broader impact of that program on your community. And I'm really emphasizing impact here because I know that there is a tendency to kind of just ask questions that are kind of like customer service questions that are asking about things like likability. Did you enjoy this program? How much did you appreciate the catering of the program? And there's definitely a place for questions like that. Some humanities programs have at the center a healthy meal as a way of helping parents who are bringing their children to those programs, help make those programs more accessible, right? And if the meal they don't think it's edible, then there is no point in serving that meal. That's one of the goals of the program. But it's not always the only goal of the program, and focusing overly on customer service oriented questions it makes it so that there's not enough space for you to ask about impact oriented questions. And those impact oriented questions that think about the humanities within the context of broader social goals are the ones that are going to help you connect with policymakers and with funders, and really strengthen your work in general. So I really want to encourage you to think through, and this is the hardest part in many cases, but what are the goals of your program? What is the impact that you're hoping for? And then finally, is there anything you want to learn about your program besides? And that could be catering. It could be, was it easy to find parking at the space? Those are all valid questions to ask. You just don't want them to be the only kinds of questions that you ask. And then because I think it's helpful, to think about what those common impacts for humanities programs, those kind of public good impacts are. Here's a list of just some of them here. Knowledge acquisition, motivation to continue learning, opportunities for self-reflection, appreciation for local and cultural heritage, community appreciation, community pride, connection to local institutions, connections to each other, encountering new perspectives, fostering empathy, strength and trust, serving others, building social support networks. These are all wonderful outcomes or impacts of a humanities program. And they're all things that you can ask questions about. One of the things at the end of this session, I will have up on the slide, and then the slides will go to you so you'll have access to them. The National Humanities Alliance actually has developed a toolkit for surveying humanities programs. And in that toolkit, there are in groups of questions for subject areas like these. There are pre-developed questions that you can draw on to develop your own surveys. And we also have a number of pre-developed surveys that are free to use. So that's one of the resources that you'll have coming out of this session. And one of the reasons that we're doing this to begin with. Finally, I think finally for this section, you want to draft your survey. So you start with your must-have. your demographic information, your required questions from funders, that kind of thing. You want to have a sense, maybe your survey is going to be a page long, or maybe, on a piece of paper, or maybe it's going to have 2 pages front and back, or the equivalent online link. So you want to have a sense of what you have to have in there and how you can get something new in there, or like how much you can add, right? So you get those must-have questions in first. And then for each of your program goals, those important oriented program goals that you wrote down, you want to design 2 or 3 questions that get at the heart of those goals. You can be creative with them. A survey, it's an iterative process, right? Like you design it, you get it out in the world, and you might learn later on that maybe that question didn't work exactly as you planned it to, or maybe it worked better than you thought it would, and you might repurpose it in other places. But it's not ever the end of the world if something doesn't work out exactly as you planned. You can always revisit your survey if you have ongoing programs. You can always you can continue to refine the work that you're doing on those surveys as you go through the year or years. You want to use a mixture of qualitative and quantitative measures. If you want to think about your staff time when you're doing that, qualitative measures require a lot more reading, and they require more focused analysis. So maybe you only have time thinking about what you can actually analyze. Maybe you only have space for 1 or 2 qualitative questions. That's fine. And you want to focus more on quantitative measures. Or maybe you have a really small group of people that you're surveying, so small that maybe a quantitative measure, a group of 5 people, quantitative measures are going to be less meaningful. And maybe in those cases, you're not going to have an enormous number of surveys. You want to focus more on qualitative measures. Either of those things can work. You just want to have a mixture that works the way you want it to for the group that you're surveying. And finally, you want to use a Likert scale for quantitative questions. I know that there are several more slides on this, but a Likert scale, usually on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 4, or agree to disagree, that helps you get a sense of the quantitative results of your questions. Okay, I'm actually going to pause just for a second because this section goes on for a while to see if there are any questions at this point, and also just to take a drink of water.
So there wasn't any questions, just a comment from Tony Messina. I've been involved in surveys for the sake of surveys. Much better, as you note, to connect to program goals. The hard part is follow-up, and we really have to be dedicated to continuous improvement.
Yeah, you do have to be dedicated to continuous improvement. But and I actually think that's one of the nice things. I get really stressed personally if I'm like, this has to be perfect from the get-go. That's just not the way I function. And so I think being committed to that continuous improvement of the survey, of your program, and of the way that you communicate about your work, because I think that's what these surveys are also about. They're also about how do we communicate about the work that we're doing, and how can I make that better, right? Like continuous commitment to all of those things can make surveying a really flourishing and central part of the work that you do. Okay, I want to give you a sense of some of the kinds of quantitative questions that we use. And just a reminder that a quantitative question doesn't actually have to be a question. It can be an agree or disagree statement. People are used to that. They're not surprised by it. These are all questions that have been developed with community partners and have been tested in many different kinds of community programs, and they work pretty well. These are questions, as you can see, also that are about the impact of the program on the participants. So statements like, this program gave me opportunities to consider and share experiences from my life. Participating in this program enhanced my sense of connection to my community. I encountered new perspectives through this program. I take pride in the fact that this program is being held in my community. These have all been really fruitful. And I think one of the things to remember about quantitative questions like this that are focused on impact is that people, as I said earlier in the presentation, are used to being surveyed, and they're kind of sophisticated about surveying. And so they're going to get a sense through your survey about what the goals of your program really are, ideally. And then when you get to those qualitative questions, if you have really strong questions like these, what you'll find when you get to the qualitative questions is that people kind of respond within the framework that they've already been offered. And so they might have many ways to respond, but often they will offer you examples of new perspectives that they encountered, or they'll talk about experiences from their lives that they shared. And that's really, it can be really profound and valuable for people who are often delivering programs but don't have the opportunity so much to hear back about the programs. And these things are also really valuable for funders who are very used to hearing from the people who run programs, but much less used to hearing from the people who participate in programs or take advantage of the programs. Getting those qualitative perspectives is really valuable, and getting those most valuable qualitative perspectives is deeply connected to the kinds of quantitative questions that you ask in the first place. You want to use a Likert scale. I once worked with like a national organization, and they were really excited about working on their surveys, and they proposed a Likert scale of 1 to 100, which is very complicated. I would not suggest doing that. Keep it simple, on a scale of 1 to 10 if you're doing a scale, or 1 to 5, or using the kind of, with 1 as with a lowest denominator and then a highest denominator, strongly disagree, neutral, don't know, agree, strongly agree. We try to provide a neutral if neutral or don't know is really an option, but sometimes it's not. Either, like with frequency, for instance, sometimes they either do or do not do things, and you're just trying to get a sense of how often, or with important it either is or is not. I mean, you could have, I guess, a neutral. It's just we chose not to. We wanted to push people a little bit to think about what they really thought. So you have options, but these are common scales. They're in the toolkit, but they're also like eminently Googleable if you're just trying to see some examples of scales that can be used. And then qualitative questions. This is really, as someone who has spent most of her life as a qualitative research, this is really my bread and butter. It's the stuff that I love the most. And I just really, I love hearing from participants, and this is your opportunity to do so. The thing about qualitative questions too is that they can be really, you can use them on surveys, of course, but the kinds of lessons you think about with qualitative questions and program goals, those can also be transferred to other kinds of data collection, such as interviews or focus groups. So those are, again, really worthy things to do if you are able to do it with the staff time that you have. And these are lessons that can be taken in all these contexts. So again, these are qualitative questions that were developed for different surveys that we've worked on. There are many, many, many more, both of quantitative and qualitative questions in the toolkit. So I don't want you to get a sense that this is the only kind of thing we ask about, or that this is the only thing we have to offer. But some questions are things like, please just share more about how you saw your own experiences or heritage reflected or informed by the topics explored in the program. How did the program shape or help your understanding of a topic? What aspects of the program did you particularly connect with, and why? What was the most valuable part of the program for you? And this one is a really simple question. Is if we don't have a lot of space to ask deeper qualitative questions, that's usually the one that we leave on the menu, and people really respond to it. So don't feel like you have to have super deep or super difficult questions. And then also, what do you consider to be the most important thing you learned and why? Also a really, really strong question if you don't have space for others, and strong to leave as the last question, even if you do. And then finally, as you write your survey, you want to keep in mind the length. 1 or 2 pages for a public program is okay, especially if it's a mix of quantitative and qualitative, and especially if you're thinking about actual pages and you have to leave space for those qualitative questions. You can do a little bit more online because people are fast, and they will get through those quantitative questions quickly. So you can sometimes, in typing is faster than writing sometimes. You want to think carefully about the wording of your questions and the manner of your distribution. Are you going to use an email link, a QR code? Are you going to have tablets? Are you going to have pieces of paper? How are you going to analyze the data? We really recommend that people use online distribution methods if at all possible, because it just makes your life easier. It's so much easier to read something that someone has typed up than it is to have to transcribe handwritten surveys, and then also to analyze those handwritten surveys. Sometimes it's almost impossible, And people, when in virtual platforms, people will write out whole sentences, where on a hard copy piece of paper, they might only write out a few words. Both of those things can be incredibly valuable, but just be aware that you might get different kinds of responses. And if it's possible to use a virtual option for people, at least, even if you're providing hard copies of the surveys, it's a really good thing. It's starting to thunder really loudly here, so apologies if you're having trouble hearing me, and please let me know if you can't. Okay, and then finally, don't forget to workshop your survey. It's so important. I think when you're trying something new, there can be this sense that you have to kind of keep it to yourself, or maybe you're nervous about how it's going to come out. But we're all people who work with words, right? And it's fun to workshop things, and you're going to get a better product if you just sit down with your team or with another volunteer or with someone who is interested in making sure that this is really good. And it's not really just about, you want to make sure that it's, clean and that there are fewer typos if possible, but it's also about, like, did that question come out the way I thought it did? Or am I understanding this correctly? Getting as many eyes on a survey before you implement it as possible is just a really, really helpful thing to do. All right, I'm going to pause just for a second, see to look at the chat. All right. I'm not seeing anything new, and I can move on as necessary, or I can take just a second if someone has a question. Okay, I'm going to move on, and then if someone has something that comes up, we can always come back to it. Step 3, implementing your survey. So we have a few tips, pretty straightforward. Again, digital distribution and collection methods minimize your labor, the work that you actually have to do, and the reading of people's scribbly handwriting that you have to do. It can just make things a lot easier. But paper surveys are important, and just don't forget pens and clipboards if possible. I have a colleague who kind of got his start working. He was surveying festivals, like music festivals, and he would show up at these music festivals with pens and clipboards, and he would kind of hang out over by the food lines or by the porta potties, where people are kind of taking a break and they have some time, and people were really happy to fill out those surveys for him. And so you think about how you distribute. Are people actually going to be able to fill out the survey the way you have it? And how can you catch them at maybe a down moment, right? Like if you have people attending a program and they're all sitting down around the table, maybe you just take a couple minutes at the end and say, hey, can you take the survey? If you're at a festival type environment, maybe you have surveys by the doors, but maybe you have people wandering the event to just see if people will take surveys about their experiences. We've gotten really great surveys in that way. One from the Johnny Cash Annual Heritage Festival that was entirely done with the clipboard and pen system, and it worked. We got a really robust survey sample and a lot of really important information about why people valued the program and what it did for them. And then most importantly, tell people why your survey is important. As you'll see in this toolkit, every survey we have has a disclaimer on it that says something like, this is why we're doing this survey, and your survey responses are anonymous, but they might be used in these ways. And that's the permission they're giving you when they agree to fill out the survey. And we also include a sentence about why it's important. And we also encourage people to say that over and over and over again. Why is taking the survey important? Why does it matter to you? People often leave humanities programs having had profound experiences, and they're happy to tell somebody about those experiences if they think that anyone is listening and anyone cares. The survey is your chance to get people to tell you about what the experiences that they've had. And if they know that you're really going to read it and do something with it, that can be exciting to them. We encourage people to do it online also. You're sending out an email about your survey, include a sentence at the very beginning of that email. Not just, please take our survey, but this is why this survey matters and why we're collecting this data. It makes a big difference. It's also just a kind of above board thing to do. And then finally, analyzing your data. This is a really big section, and I didn't give as much time to it because honestly, it's one of those things that you kind of just have to do it, but I do have to do it and practice it and get comfortable with it. But I do have some tips and some suggestions. I'm sorry. Okay. So one of the most important things that I can suggest is to remember to code and match your qualitative responses to your quantitative responses. So you have your data. If you are doing it online, using something like Google Forms, our organization uses Qualtrics as well, which is expensive but is useful to us in the different ways that we do surveying. There are a number of online paid programs and free programs like Google Forms that can help you deliver surveys. Most of those things will do a kind of brief, a good quantitative analysis for you. So then you're looking at, how many people agreed or disagreed with your quantitative questions. And you want to read through that and kind of get a sense of where people stand and have a sense of the kind of overall response to your survey. But then you want to do the same thing with your qualitative questions. So what we like to do, coding is just a fancy word for like analyzing something, right? So you just like sit down. I like to print them out. I think it makes it easier for me to read and make notes on. And just for the first time, just read through those qualitative results and make note of things maybe that are standing out to you. Sometimes I do this in a group with other people, and we'll have a conversation about what we read. We'll say, well, this stood out to me, and this stood out to me, and this stood out to me, and we'll kind of think through together what, especially when we have really big data sets, what we saw. So from that, you can kind of get a sense of what your themes are, the themes in the responses. Very likely they're going to match up to some extent with some of the questions that you asked in your quantitative section. And from there, you can pull quotes out that match those themes. Sometimes we count them. You can say, especially if you have a really robust data set or a really small one, maybe everyone answered in the same way, then that can become a quantitative measure, right? You can say 100% of people made this kind of statement. Or you might say 30% of the respondents focus on this in their qualitative response if you have a bigger data set. So you can do counting that can help you get a sense of the degree to which people kind of responded to certain themes in the work that you did. And then what's really powerful in your funding, especially if you're doing grant reports, or actually we do this for advocacy all of the time, talking about giving quantitative data from your quantitative questions. So for instance, right here, we have a question from a survey that we did with the International Storytelling Center on a program on African American heritage in Appalachia that they did. And 87% of respondents agreed that they have a better sense of the stories that are missing from our popular depictions of Appalachia after participating in this program. That was, I think, very clearly one of their big program goals. And then we had tons of qualitative data. People they really robustly responded to this survey. And then what we did is we pulled out quotations that match up, that show the way that people have a better sense of the stories that are missing, to kind of give life to that quantitative information. When we create briefing document, one of the things that we do as an organization is we advocate on the Hill for federal humanities funding. And when I'm creating briefing documents or I'm creating materials of any sort for that, this is exactly what I do. I get that highline quantitative data so that they can get a sense of the degree to which people care. And then I include those qualitative stories, because getting that connection is what really, I think that gives life to the data. It makes people care about what that data says and why communities need humanities programs. So that is time consuming, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not. You really have to think about it and work on it. But it is well worth the effort in your reporting, and it can really help you as an organization think about the impact that you're having. And I mean, I think it's really empowering to get this kind of data and to see not just how satisfied people might be about programs, but the degree to which those programs made them think or reflect. Okay, and then there's a lot of places where you can use survey data, of course, grant reports, grant applications, fundraising, social media, blog posts, press outreach, advocacy. As long as you've included a disclaimer in your survey about the ways you might use the data, you can use the data. And I want to also say that, most of the time the data is anonymous, but sometimes it's not. And as long as you have permission from the person, that's okay too. So for instance, maybe you do an interview with people and maybe there's just like no way that this is going to be anonymous, and everybody, you've made that clear. They have agreed to you maybe in writing that they're like happy to have their quotations used in different ways. I would still like double check. I'd say, oh, I would and do send an email like, hey, I'm going to use this quote in this context on this policy document in this report. I just want to make sure that's okay. Sometimes they change like a comma or something like that to make it look a little bit nicer. But that's really common. And as long as you have permissions, those can be great things to use in things like blog posts, advocacy, press outreach. And even anonymous quotations, for instance, are extremely powerful. And there are cases where you will want to use them. So I don't want to discourage you from doing that either. Okay, last few things before really opening up for questions and thoughts. I want to encourage you to download our toolkit, which has an overview of everything I've said today, but in a great deal more detail. Again, this is free on the National Humanities Alliance website. I'm going to, there's a link in the next slide again, which will be sent to you. But the toolkit has an overview. It has questions grouped according to theme for people who have, all of those questions have been robustly tested and have worked really well on surveys. We have also worked with so many community groups, and we have created a number of just surveys that can be used in humanities programs. And so in addition to downloading the Community Impact Toolkit, you can download individual surveys for digitation events, conversations on race and place, faculty workshops, humanities festivals, Humanities Summer Bridge programs, K-12 educator workshops, local history lecture series, public programs for veterans, veterans discussion groups. There's just a really wide range of surveys on there, and we're glad for you to use them, and they're free. You don't even have to give us your email to access this stuff. We have a number of resources. You can access them at our website. The Impact Survey Toolkit is probably going to be the most directly relevant to you, but you also might like our resources on showcasing community impact. And then if you do sign up for our email newsletter, you'll learn more. You can have access. Well, we send out maybe a couple of emails a month about the resources we have, and also advocacy alerts if that's something that you want. That is it for me, at least for the presentation portion of this section. I'm going to stop the screen share now.
Thank you, Cecily. So yeah, we had a couple questions come in. First one is from Joey Hayes. What would you say would be a realistic expectation of return on surveys? 50%, 60%?
Okay, that is a great question, and it's extremely context dependent. We've had surveys with veterans programs, and these are programs, a lot of veterans programs where it's really like small, almost like a course, and sometimes in fact a course where it's a small group of people meeting over and over and over again. And with those programs of people who like really invested time, we get almost 100%. We did a lot of work with programs for K-12 educators that included both pre, post, and year out surveys. And we got staggeringly high response rates for things like that. Sometimes as high as 90% for the pre and post survey, and even the year out survey getting as much as 50 to 75%. That's a really high response rate for a year out survey. But again, that's another program where the people are really, it's like those are time intensive programs. And so people are kind of invested in talking about those programs. They leave with a lot of energy. Public programs where you're you have a little bit more of a captive audience. Maybe it's something like this where we send a survey out right at the very end. you might have still a pretty high survey response. But then and sometimes that might be in like the 20 to 40% range. That's a good survey response. We've also had survey things where we were just kind of blind emailing a whole bunch of people. And when you do that, you're going to get a much lower survey response rate. And something like 10% is a really good response. And those are places where you might want to offer a gift card. Those were things like surveying an organization's entire membership to find out about like their experience of working with that organization. And so the people had not necessarily been to a program recently. We were actually coming out of COVID, so they might not have been to a program in years. They were, it was a blind email. They were not expecting it. And they were not necessarily, people don't always even open their emails. So with those, I think we got closer to a 10%, but that was still considered a strong response rate given that. Okay, I'm going to read it out loud because I know this is going to be recorded too. So a follow-up question is to this, and I know there's one before, but I'll come back to it. What percentage of survey do you feel you need to scrap before the survey because the turnout was so low? 10% or 5% of those surveys, sometimes we receive very few back. I think I think the key is just to be honest about what that rate is, right? Like you don't want to, like an example of like dishonesty would be like everybody, like people were clearly unhappy with the program. Everything went terribly wrong. And you got like 2 surveys back from people or like donors, and they were extremely positive because they were biased. And you wouldn't want to like misrepresent that. I know you wouldn't, but that's just a kind of extreme example. Sometimes who the survey respondents are. But you might also just acknowledge that like sometimes in these contexts, it's hard to get a really big number of surveys. And you can say, we sent out this number of surveys. You don't even have, maybe you don't really know sometimes how many people actually received the survey, right? If it's email, you don't know how many people ever checked that email address. It's very hard to tell anymore from your email open rates because of the bots that check it first. You might be able to say we had 2,000 people come to this event and we had 200 responses. Then you have a sense of what percentage that is. I think the key is just to be like, well, this is the number of responses that we had. I have trouble imagining a scenario in which I would just scrap something. I think all data can be used. You don't want to use it manipulatively or anything, but it can still be useful information to help you think about your program and the work you did, or maybe even how to better deliver that survey, right? So yeah, just be like really straightforward and really honest about, we didn't hear back from a lot of people, but we did hear back from these people, and here's what they had to say. And I do want to give just like a sense of context is that when I first started this job, I interviewed someone who had run a national program, one that had like sub-programs in all 50 states. I think they were working with PBS stations, and they had just, we knew that a lot of people had participated in these programs. We did not have a sense of how many people had participated in the program. And they had worked with their partners to get out surveys, and they had 100 survey responses. It had to have been the tiniest percentage of the people who actually participated or even received the survey. But nobody thought about that survey as like a failure. They definitely contextualized it. They were like, we know this is a small number. And there are also reasons that people might not have wanted to just respond to a survey. But here's the data that we do have about people's experiences at the program. And those experiences still matter, even if the survey response is small. So there's always ways to use things to reflect at least, and just be honest about your survey results. And I feel like I can't answer this other question about, is there a certain number of these surveys that will favor a grant approval for consideration? I think I work mostly with people who've already received grants. Missouri Humanities might have a different, you might have a different perspective than me, but I'm usually just working with people to evaluate the grants that they already have.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that question because I don't work with the grants program, so apologize.
I do think that it's actually pretty rare for humanities programs to really do a lot of robust surveying. I work with some institutions that are extremely like prominent. And I also work with really small institutions that are prominent in their local community. And there's a lot of commonality between those different organizations. Like it's pretty rare for organizations to do like truly robust surveying. And I think it shows in the grant applications, even if you don't have like a specific number that you're doing. I think people who do that, they do well often in grant applications. Any other questions?
All right, I don't think so. Oh, one person said thank you. So yeah, thank you very much, Cecily.
I put my email in the slide deck, and I'm always, I'm a chatty person. I'm always available to chat or to point you. If you're looking for a resource, always happy to point you in the direction of that resource. And I think I would just like to, like in closing, just say thank you. And good luck with the surveying. It's hard work, but well worth it.
All right, yeah, thank you very much, Cecily, for presenting today, and thank you to all our attendees for joining us. Please keep an eye out for an email from Missouri Humanities with a survey link and the slideshow from today. Next month's virtual capacity building workshop will be on Tuesday, October 1st at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, and be on fundraising by Kevin Jameson. If you're registered for today's workshop, don't worry because you're already registered for the following 6 sessions. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.